The movie opens with a king chasing a fearsome dragon. Determined to slay the beast, he follows it into a dark cave with his loyal soldiers. As they cautiously advance, the king notices something unusual, perhaps a clue about the dragon's nature or a hidden danger. Suddenly, the dragon unleashes a torrent of fire, ambushing them. One by one, the king's soldiers fall, leaving him defenseless. With no other option, the terrified king begs for his life before the monstrous creature. The scene abruptly shifts to another kingdom many years later. This land is now impoverished, its people suffering from famine and despair. Amidst this hardship, a royal proposal arrives. A prince from a powerful and wealthy kingdom seeks Princess Elodie's hand in marriage. Her father, the king, is overjoyed, believing this alliance could save their struggling kingdom. Though reluctant, Elodie agrees, sacrificing her own happiness for the sake of her people. As the wedding procession sets out for the prince's kingdom, they encounter a violent storm at sea. Amidst the crashing waves, shadowy figures of dragons appear, ominous and mysterious. Despite the danger, they eventually arrive safely at the grand palace. Elodie is awestruck by its splendor. It dwarfs her own humble home. A royal servant warmly welcomes them and escorts them to their chambers to rest. That night, while standing on the balcony, Elodie spots flickering flames in the distant mountains. The next morning, the queen announces her approval of the marriage, declaring that the wedding will take place the following day. She then requests a private discussion with Elodie's father, hinting at unspoken arrangements. Later, the prince and Elodie take a walk to get to know each other. Suspicious of his intentions, Elodie asks if he, too, is being forced into this union. The prince reassures her, claiming he was drawn to her beauty and grace. As they converse, they wander up a nearby hill. Elodie mentions the strange fire she saw in the mountains the previous night. The prince hesitates before explaining that those mountains hold great significance. A sacred cave within them houses ancient rituals. After their wedding, they will journey there as part of the ceremony. In the next scene, Elodie's father is visibly disturbed after his meeting with the queen. His face is pale, his hands unsteady, something has shaken him deeply. When Elodie's mother presses him about his distress, he avoids her questions, brushing her off with vague excuses. Sensing his evasion, she grows more concerned. Determined to uncover the truth, she decides to confront the queen herself. However, the queen is cold and arrogant. She dismisses Elodie's mother with a haughty glare, mocking her for coming from a petty, insignificant kingdom. Humiliated but undeterred, Elodie's mother returns to her daughters and confides in them, whispering, "I fear something terrible is coming." Before they can discuss further, Elodie's father suddenly appears. He pulls his wife away. His nervous glances make it clear, he's hiding a dark secret. Meanwhile, the wedding proceeds. Elodie, draped in ornate bridal attire, follows the prince toward the ominous mountains where she had seen the mysterious flames days earlier. Now, as they enter a cavern deep within the mountain, Elodie's unease grows. Inside the cave, the kingdom's nobles and priests stand in solemn silence, their faces shadowed by torchlight. The queen steps forward, her voice echoing against the stone walls. "Long ago," she declares, "a dragon ravaged our land. 100 years have passed, but its hunger was never sated. Our king, your ancestor, tried to slay it, but failed. To spare his life, he struck a cursed bargain. Every generation we must offer 3 royal daughters to the beast. Today, Elodie, you are the final sacrifice." The truth crashes over Elodie like a wave. Her marriage was never an alliance, it was a trap. The prince's gentle words, her father's silence, the queen's smug cruelty, it all makes sense now. The flames she saw were no ritual, they were the dragon's breath. And the cave isn't a sacred site, it's a feeding ground. The queen's voice dripped with grim satisfaction as she continued. Before Elodie could react, the queen drew a ceremonial dagger and sliced both her and the prince's palms, pressing their bleeding hands together. "Now you are bound as one." The prince, his face eerily blank, scooped Elodie into his arms. For a fleeting moment, she felt a rush of warmth, perhaps hope, before he hurled her into the yawning pit below. The impact knocked her unconscious. When she awoke, her screams echoed off the cavern walls. "Help! Someone!" But the only response was the shuddering breath of something ancient stirring in the dark. The dragon, roused by her voice, uncoiled from its slumber, scales scraping against stone. Terror propelled Elodie to action. She scrambled for the pit's walls, clawing at slick, moss-covered rock. Again and again she slid back, her fingers raw. The ground was littered with haunting remnants, tattered gowns, rusted jewelry, the relics of sacrifices before her. A burst of fire lit the cavern. Elodie whirled to see ember-winged insects reduced to ash, and beyond them, the dragon's molten gaze fixed on her. "What is your name?" it demanded, its voice like cracking stone. "Elodie," she gasped. The dragon inhaled deeply. "Royal blood," it hissed. "You come by bargain. And by bargain you will die." Instinct took over. Elodie bolted, the dragon's fire licking at her heels. She dove into a narrow crevice, but not fast enough. Searing pain shot through her leg as flames grazed her ankle. Gritting her teeth, she ripped a strip from her wedding gown and bandaged the blistering wound. "No, I won't die here." She forced herself upright. The dragon's roar shook the cave, but Elodie ran deeper into the darkness, her breath ragged, her mind screaming one truth: escape or burn. Gritting her teeth against the pain in her leg, Elodie forced herself to keep moving through the cavern's labyrinthine tunnels. The air grew colder, the darkness thicker, until a faint blue glow pulsed ahead like a beacon. Heart pounding, she limped toward it, only to freeze at the edge of a gaping chasm. On the other side stood an ancient, gnarled tree, its branches shimmering with that otherworldly light. Behind her, the dragon's snarl echoed through the cavern. Ahead, certain death. No choice. She backed up, ready to sprint and leap a misstep. Her foot slipped on the damp rock. She flung out her arms, the ceremonial knife still clutched in her hand, and stabbed it into the chasm wall. Dangling over the abyss, she hauled herself up, muscles screaming, and rolled onto solid ground. Up close, the tree's glow came from thousands of tiny, bioluminescent insects clinging to its bark. Their light pulsed like stars. Desperate, Elodie tore another strip from her ruined wedding gown, crafting a makeshift pouch. She scooped the insects inside, their cool radiance illuminating the tunnel ahead like a living lantern. Further in, the sound of rushing water led her to a slender waterfall trickling down the rocks. She lunged for it, parched. Fire erupted behind her. The dragon's flames licked at her heels as she sprinted, the water undrunk. She barely slid into a narrow crevice in time, the beast's jaws snapping at her shadow. "How long will you run?" it roared, its voice shaking the earth. "You are only delaying the inevitable." In the cramped hollow, Elodie's breath came in ragged gasps. Then she saw them. Names, hundreds of them, a graveyard of forgotten sacrifices. Exhaustion overtook her. She collapsed, her insect light dimming as she fell into a fitful sleep. When she woke, her skin prickled. The insects had clustered on her burned ankle, and where they touched, the blisters had vanished. She jerked upright, scattering them. The wound was smooth, healed. A realization struck. These weren't just lights. They were a gift. Clutching her glowing insect lantern, Elodie pressed forward through the jagged tunnel. Her fingers brushed against a weathered stone slab, and to her shock, it bore a crude map etched by desperate hands. An escape route. The path ahead was a nightmare of razor-sharp rocks, each step tearing at her bare feet. Blood smeared the stones, but she gritted her teeth and climbed, using the knife to anchor herself. Pain is temporary. Death is not. At last, she emerged onto a wind-lashed cliff, only to freeze in horror. The drop below was sheer and bottomless. No ropes. No vines. Just empty air. No. No. Her scream vanished into the void. Art leapt, until the dragon's massive shadow blotched out the sun. It landed before her, sulphurous breath steaming the rocks. "Run all you like," it mocked, circling her like a cat with a mouse. "This mountain is a prison of bones. None leave alive." Just as it reared to strike, a shout echoed from the caverns below, her father's voice raw with fear. The dragon's head snapped toward the sound. A distraction. Seizing her chance, Elodie scrambled down a hidden fissure, her hands slick with sweat. Halfway down, her foot dislodged rubble, revealing a cache of gold and, more chillingly, 3 shattered dragon eggs. Their iridescent shells gleamed like broken rainbows, and suddenly, Elodie understood everything. The queen's tale had been twisted, a lie wrapped around a kernel of truth. Yes, the dragon had once ravaged their kingdom, but not unprovoked. The real story was far darker. Years ago, the king had stormed this cave and found 3 dragon eggs. Seeing them as a future threat, he smashed them open and slaughtered the hatchlings inside. The mother dragon, returning to find her children dead, swore vengeance. "You took my future," she had roared to the cowering king. "Now I will take yours. Every generation, you will give me 3 daughters, until your bloodline drowns in grief as mine has." The memory dissolved like smoke, thrusting Elodie back into the present. Her father's voice echoed again, desperate, "Elodie, don't come." She spun toward the sound, just in time to see the dragon plunge a claw into her father's chest. Blood bloomed across his tunic like a grotesque flower. A scream tore from Elodie's throat, raw and primal. The dragon's head snapped toward her, nostrils flaring. Ah! The last sacrifice, it hissed, abandoning her father to stalk closer. This is my punishment, he choked out. But you must live. The ship, your mother and sister, they're waiting, his breath stuttered. Stopped. His hand went limp. Grief and fury ignited in Elodie's veins. The dragon loomed behind her, but now for the first time she saw it clearly, not a mindless monster but a mother robbed of her children. Just as she had been robbed of her father. Yet this changed nothing. Elodie climbed the chains to escape the cave, barely dodging the dragon's fire. She reached the top and jumped onto her father's horse, riding hard to get away. The dragon chased her, breathing flames. When it got too close, she slid off the horse and hid in the rocks. The dragon, furious, burned the horse instead. Far away, the queen watched everything, angry that Elodie had ruined her plan. She decided to fix things her own way. Meanwhile, Elodie's sister stood on their ship, staring at the fiery mountains. Without warning, the queen's men grabbed her. The queen had a new plan: sacrifice the sister instead of Elodie. When Elodie's mother tried to stop them, the queen stabbed her and left her bleeding on the ship. The next day, Elodie finally made it back to the ship. She found her mother weak but alive. Her mother told her, "Don't worry about me. Save your sister. The queen is taking her to the dragon now." Elodie's voice broke as she answered, "It's too late for father, but I won't lose her too." With no time left, Elodie turned toward the mountains, ready to face the dragon and the queen one last time. Elodie rushed straight to the cave, knowing the queen would take her sister there. She arrived just in time to see the queen cut both their hands, mix their blood together and throw it into the pit below. The beast emerged, snatching Elodie's sister in its claws. Hidden in the shadows, Elodie prepared. She gathered more of the glowing insects and armed herself with her father's sword and other weapons left in the cave. Meanwhile, the dragon hadn't killed Elodie's sister yet. Instead, it sat beside the remains of its own dead children, hissing, "Your ancestors murdered my hatchlings. Now I will kill their daughter Elodie and make them suffer as I have. I know she'll come for you, and I will enjoy destroying her most of all." Elodie made noise to distract the dragon. As it turned away, she sprinted to her sister. But before she could free her, the dragon returned, looming over them. "We were lied to," Elodie shouted. "They told us you attacked first, but the truth is, they killed your children." The dragon snarled. "Then their bloodline will pay." "No, we're not their real children," Elodie cried. "They tricked you. The royal family has been sacrificing innocent girls for generations, just like they killed your young." The dragon lunged, blasting fire. Elodie dodged but slipped into a pool of water, her burns screaming in pain. The dragon slashed her with its claws, but Elodie stabbed its eye with her sword. Blinded and furious, the dragon thrashed, its own fire reflecting off the cave walls and burning itself. As it writhed in agony, Elodie held up her bleeding hand. "Look at my wound. The queen mixed our blood to trick you. We're not royals, we're victims just like your children were. You've been punishing the wrong people." The dragon froze, its remaining eye widening in realization. The cave fell silent except for the crackle of dying flames. When the dragon realized the truth, it felt terrible. It told Elodie, "I should die for what I've done. Kill me." But Elodie didn't. Instead, she used the glowing insects to heal the dragon's wounds. She knew the real villains were the queen and prince, who had tricked her into being sacrificed. Back at the palace, the prince was about to trick another girl into the same deadly wedding trap. Elodie warned her to run. Then she told everyone who wanted to live to leave. The queen laughed, saying, "You survived the dragon, but you can't stop us alone." Elodie smiled. "I'm not alone." The dragon crashed into the palace, tearing it apart. The queen and prince were buried in the ruins. With them gone, Elodie's revenge was complete. In the end, Elodie, her sister, and her mother prepared to return home. Elodie told her mom, "Take this kingdom's treasure and rule better than they did." Her mother agreed, happy to start fresh. As they left, the dragon flew with them, no longer a monster but Elodie's protector. The story ends with them heading home, finally free.